So, am I being recorded now?
No.
Oh, you are.
No.
I don't
Can
know.
we get started?
Yeah.
Okay, Grandpa, the reason that we're doing this is because we just want to have a recording of some of the things that you told us, like just the basic family trait, because it's hard for us to remember. We want to hear it from you.
Well, you have to ask the right questions then, right?
Okay, so
I don't have a script.
I know. I want you to start by giving us your full name and
Oh,
telling us.
I got a lot of names.
Well, why don't you tell that? Tell us what your name is and when you were born.
And where you were born.
Let's see, where was I born? I was born in the little house.
You were born in a house, not in a hospital?
In a house.
What's your name?
At birth,
Yeah,
Sure.
at birth.
Donald Albert Nutt. N-U-T-T.
And did you ever go by the name Nut?
No. No, I avoided that.
Okay.
But there were other nuts in the high school, and they knew that I was a nut, and I knew that I was related to them, cousins,
Right.
but we never talked about it.
Right. I've heard that story before.
Until one day we finally had a conversation, but that took a couple years.
So what
What
did you
year were you born?
1932.
and what did you know about your father? Like, so you were raised by your mother? No,
No.
you were okay.
My grandmother. And all I know about the father was that he was a good dancer, according to my mother.
What was your father's name?
Archie.
Archie Nutt?
Archie.
Did you ever meet him?
I have in the back of my mind, I think I remember, I have an image in my mind of being in a car with him, but other than that, no.
Okay. But go ahead.
But he had a sister that lived here, and I never did meet her. But, and there were a couple families, Jerry and what were their names? But one of them, well, Jerry, he was a bright guy. He got out of Reed and MIT.
Oh. So a cousin of yours.
So,
So. Oh. Okay. I'm gonna back away. Maybe you can.
Just don't eat. Just
No, I'm hungry. I'm gonna eat. I'm sorry.
are you being recorded?
yeah. She's making all
But
kinds of
if
noises.
it's behind the microphone can't get it.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm almost done, Chris. Just we gotta warm Grandpa up anyway.
So,
So who raised you?
who raised me? Let's see, what was her full name? Effie Minerva Smith,
Your mother's
mother.
mother. Well, I don't know what to ask.
Who was
Who
her?
And
lived
it
in
was
the
a-
house?
Well,
When you
there
were a
was
kid?
Grandma, and I guess my mother was in and out. I don't think she lived there, but I was born there, and Delbert would have been like 14. Ilbert was 10, and the house was small, so it was a busy house. In fact, the mother and her sister, Bessie, they opted to work for the baby home down in Park Place, down the hill, and they could live there. It was a
Wait, I never heard that. What was the baby home?
well, that's what we called it. It was an orphanage for kids that were about to be adopted or whatever.
So your mother, rather than live with you, lived with other children. Is that right?
Right.
But she got food and lodging, maybe.
Well, they got lodging and they also, it was close to the streetcar, so if they wanted to get to Portland, they only had to walk like a block to the to the streetcar.
Did they do that? Did they go into Portland?
Yeah, Bessie worked at the baby home, and lived at the baby home for a while, and worked in Portland. So that was a good place to be.
But what about Reva in the baby home?
Reva worked there, but I don't know. I don't think she lived there. I don't think she lived there.
How old was your mother when she had you?
19.
And your father was also 19?
No, he was like 35.
Wait, I didn't know that part of the story. Did you?
Yeah. Do you know how they met?
No, I have no idea.
Was he married or anything? No, he wasn't married because they got married.
They got married to give me a name. And one of the nuts was outside the courthouse after the wedding. Not at the wedding, but outside of the courthouse.
Uh-huh.
And I got this directly from this cousin. And I guess maybe the story was told to him by his parents. So it was really strange. Here comes the bride and groom down the steps of the courthouse. One goes one way and the other one goes the other way. So it was,
They were not
no.
like that. I didn't realize he was much older. And you don't know how they met. The only thing you knew was that he was a good dancer.
That's all I ever heard about him. Right.
What was Oregon City like?
Oh, I know one other thing. He had property. He had a big farm in eastern Oregon.
Okay.
In fact, one of the cousins asked me one time if I got a lot of money. I never got a penny. So
Oh, like
apparently he had some money. But Reva, my mother, she didn't want me to be associated with him, partially because the stepfather was trying to be the father, and that was
your stepfather?
my stepfather, and he was not. He didn't have the best personality in the world for being a father. Kind of hard-nosed, construction type guy, and which was one reason why I lived with my grandmother, because Reva I think she sort of sensed that I'd be there on weekends once in a while. But
She sort of well, tell us about your grandma. What was she like when you were a kid?
well, she was sort of known in the community for being kind of all the young kids of the neighborhood, the 5-year-olds and 8-year-olds, they all knew her. And I don't know how she attracted them, but I don't know whether she had food, but there were always kids around her house.
But so she wasn't, did she work?
She taught school for several years, 4th and 5th grade. And I think she lived in a house by the school, which was out near Redland, 10 miles towards Mount Hood.
So there were always kids around.
She was always around kids.
What about her personality? Was she warm? Was she nice to be around?
She was nice to be around, but she had kind of not to me, but she was, it's kind of hard to explain. She kind of hard-nosed, at least until you got to know her. She was a community leader. She was the president of the PTA and all kinds of stuff. So,
But she wasn't maybe immediately warm?
right. So.
But the kids liked her.
Oh, yeah.
So didn't she run a child care out of the house?
Yeah, she had, she was authorized to have 8 kids during World War II. So I was like 10 years old, and so I helped her herd these kids. She had a good piece of property for it, but there was a street without a fence, so my big job was to keep any kids from playing on the street.
So,
What was Oregon City like when you were growing up?
Well, Bud Hansel used to refer to it as the village. The town, the main street has always been the center of the town until the shopping centers came along, and that sort of dispersed the.
Did you have electricity?
I had electricity from day one. Electricity was added here in the mid-20s, and I was born in 32, so
Did you have running water?
I had running water, but see, in World War II, all the guys were either working 7 days a week, and either that or in the war, and so to have some little plumbing job done was not easy to get done. So all the way through World War II, we had running water on the porch. Now we had a faucet and a sink in the kitchen, but it was never hooked up.
Because it was difficult to find someone to
Well,
go
there
to
was
it.
just no one around to do that sort of thing. So,
What about your grandfather?
well, the grandfather was like in his 80s. And he died when he was like 82, and he was a little senile for the last 10 years. But he liked me, and
What was his name?
William. Everybody called him Bill. I don't know what his middle name was. William Smith. And he came over on a wagon at age 5, 1865.
End of the Oregon Trail, like before the railroad came in.
Right.
Wasn't there a story about his parents getting shot on the trail or something?
His mother got shot by a loaded weapon on the wagon, like one day out of Illinois or something. Early in the trip.
Do you know who raised him?
He had an uncle here in Park Place, and also there was some relative in southern Washington. And between those two families, that's how he was raised.
Okay, can you explain to me the story of your grandmother and your grandfather, and how your grandmother came from Mahama and he was Jeannie's husband, something?
Yeah, she at 13 she left Mahama. She moved in with her aunt, who was married to the grandfather.
Your grandfather.
Right. They didn't have any children, but they were divorced, and my grandmother then married the husband, the grandfather.
Her uncle.
Her uncle. Right,
By marriage.
by marriage.
How much older was he than she?
Well, he was about 30 years older than she was, approximately. Things were tough in those days.
Okay, when you say they're tough, what do you mean? Like that there wasn't a lot to do, or that it was hard work?
Well, social life must have had some constraints on it. I don't know.
Like, do you think that somebody like Grandma Effie had a lot of fun in her life?
That's a fair question, and I never heard much about fun. Those kind of stories were pretty sparse. So she was active in the community. She was a president of the PTA, and she was active in the Grange. In fact, she was a charter member of the Abernathy Grange, which was a big deal. And as a result of that, she rounded up all the grandkids, and we were sort of forced into joining the Grange. And I had a couple close friends that were sort of forced into joining the Grange, so I stuck it out for, I don't know, a couple years. They had a special program for the youth in the Grange. We had a degree team. Well, you learn the ritual of the Grange, and you sort of hard to explain, but as part of the, sort of like a lodge. That's what it is a farming community lodge, and so they had these kids, teenagers, So we would learn the passages, the dialogue, the rules of the Grange, and there's sort of a ceremony where you march around this hall and you stop at certain stations and you give the spiel, whatever it is, and you march on. I was an assistant gatekeeper. Not the gatekeeper, but the assistant gatekeeper.
Did you? But it sounds like you didn't like being part of the Grange. Was it boring, or why?
Well, they made it interesting enough so that we were involved for a couple of years. But after that, then there really wasn't much in the Grange for just maybe a 15-year-old, but not a 17-year-old. So kids spent a couple of years in the Grange, and that was it.
How did you get your name? How did you go from a nut to
A Miller.
a Miller?
Well, my mother said I was probably a sophomore in high school, and she says, "Well, meet me at the courthouse. We're going to get your name changed." And I'd been using the name Don Smith because I lived with Effie Smith, and everybody else was a Smith, so I became Don Smith. And I knew that so I thought she was going to have my legal. I knew my legal name was Nutt. Never used it, but I carried around an ID that had Donald Nutt on it for a while. Birth certificate.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the joke was I could be Don Miller, Don Smith, or Don Nutt. I had ID for all three names, but anyway, so I meet her at the courthouse, and we go in, and there's a little hearing of sorts, and we come out, and what she had done is that she had my name changed to Miller instead of Smith. I was upset, but that's the way it was.
Who was Miller?
Well, that was her married name. She married Miller. Bill Miller.
So your mother changed your name to her husband's name.
Miller, right.
Did you use Miller right away?
I fought it for a long time. I hung on to Smith, but when I went into the Army, it's pretty hard not to use the legal name, so I started using it more after Army.
And when you came back from the Army, you just kept using Miller?
Right. I sort of gave up Smith. Well, I used to hang out in a tavern in Seattle where there was a Don Smith, and this was in the '60s. Every time his name would come up, my ears would perk up because I was responding to the Don Smith.
Do you ever wish now that you could be Don Smith again, or you don't care?
Now I don't care, but I was a little upset for quite a few years. I was never really comfortable with the name. But, after a couple, 3 years and your other things, those are busy years. The first thing you know, you meet new people, and if you got to use your legal name, well, that's who you are. So, but some people in Park Place that I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, they still call me Don Smith. So that's kind of rewarding.
So I want to talk about Philemon and Minerva. Who are they?
This is a test.
Not a test.
Philemon. That was my grandmother's father. Right? Okay?
No.
Past. No. Grandfather.
Grandfather.
That's right. Now you're going to try to trip me up.
No.
Albert is Effie's father.
Albert is the
Okay, so can you explain from the generations from you to Philemon? Like there was you, and then who, and then who, and then who?
Well, there's my mother Reva, who was a daughter of Effie. Her maiden name was Effie Morris. Her mother was Minerva Morris. No. Her name was Minerva Her last name was
Her first name was Emma.
Emma. What was her last name?
Emma May.
Emma May. That's
And Emma May married. Who was Effie's father?
right.
Albert.
Albert. Okay.
It's hard to keep straight,
It
right?
is, yeah, because you know those names, they come up so seldom that I don't remember them at all.
So let's talk about the people you remember. So your grandmother had many siblings.
4. No,
Nope.
she had one sister and 5 brothers. Aunt Lou was a sister who was a farmer, a sheep farmer in Mahama. Kenneth, the youngest, was a carpenter. And I don't know the order, but there was Kenneth and Earl, who was a neighbor, lived here in Park Place. Roscoe, who lived with us, with Grandma, for the last 10 years of his life. Sort of an ornery personality. He and I, at 16, Roscoe and I we were at odds most of the time.
Okay.
So, let's see, where am I now?
Roscoe, Earl, you haven't gotten to Bert or
Kenneth is the youngest boy.
You got
Bert is a cabinet maker who lived in Mahama. Then Lou is her sister, Aunt Lou. Walter was her oldest brother. And Walter, most of them were carpenters. Earl was her brother.
which ones were you closest to? Who do you see the most?
Roscoe, because he lived with us for a while. Earl, who lived a couple blocks away. And I would see Kenneth maybe a couple times a year. And her sister also lived here with us for a while. Aunt Lou. And most of these families stayed near Mahama. So as a child, Grandma and I would go to Mahama with Bessie and Bud, who had wheels. We didn't have cars, so we got to go back and visit Grandma's relatives in Mahama.
What was Mahama like? Do you remember?
Well, not a town. I don't remember.
Oh, like where did you go when you went to Mahama?
When would we go?
Where?
Oh,
Did you go to
well, we would
somebody's
go to
house?
Aunt Lou's, who had a big farmhouse up on the top of a hill, a couple miles off to the left as you're facing east. I think we talked about that one time. I don't know whether you ever saw it, or were you ever there in the daytime where you could look around
In Mahama?
in Mahama?
I think we've only been to Philemon's Land,
Okay,
which is in Sublimity. But are in Sublimity and Mahama like right near each other?
Mm-hmm.
right.
How do you know how the family ended up in Mahama?
Well, only I think when they arrived on the wagons, they went to Staten. That was a popular spot, and apparently they migrated. The farmland you could carve out a living, either with sheep, I guess, or there was some cheap place to go homestead. And I think that's probably how they got there.
I think somebody must have had a homestead in the family in Mahama. Somebody's husband or something, right? Something.
Yeah, I don't remember ever going to my grandmother's house in Mahama. That house must have been. I'm not sure that it could have been history by then, but I don't remember that.
So you would go to Aunt Lou's.
Aunt Lou's, Uncle Bert, and Kenneth and Bert, and there were a couple other relatives. Orrin, who lived in Sublimity, he had several children, and a couple of them lived in Mahama. So every summer we would make a couple trips to Mahama.
Did you like going to Mahama?
Yeah, that was about the only point out of Oregon City. The only bad thing about going to Mahama is that I would go with Bessie and Bud, and Donna Jean would be there. So one of the reasons why they took me wherever they went is because I could babysit Donna Jean.
How much younger was Donna Jean?
4 years younger. We
Just-
got along, but you know, I'm like 15 and she's 11. That's a little testy, and she liked me, so everything I did, she had to be right there too. So that was just sort of irritating.
When you think about Donna Jean, was she was your cousin? Did you see her often enough that it was more like having a sister, or not really?
I saw her pretty often. One reason I saw her often is, but I had a firecracker stand when I was 15, and the place for the location was in her front yard.
Why?
Well, because it was on Holcomb Road. That was a good spot for selling firecrackers. But the downside was I had to put up with Donna Jean, so that was not good. 'Cause every place I'd be with, you know, she was right there, and got kind of tired of it. But we got along.
You didn't try to enlist her as your sales girl with the firecrackers?
What?
You didn't try and enlist her as your sales girl?
No, she enlisted herself. I'd be there peddling firecrackers, and she'd be right there beside me. And she was trying to get involved, but she was just a little bit too young to pick up on how to sell firecrackers.
So, you went to Oregon City High School?
Yep,
What year did you graduate?
1950.
And then what did you do after high school?
I went to work. Well, I already had one job at Safeway. In fact, for 20 years, I spent weekends at Safeway.
Starting when? How old were you when you started?
17. And my last Safeway job was 1962. So I was 30. And I was a good Safeway clerk, so wherever I went, the first thing I would do, I would find the nearest Safeway store and go in and tell them who I was, and they'd say, put on an apron. So I had a job instantly wherever I went.
So what did you do after high school?
After high school, I went to work on construction during the week, and then of course Safeway Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. Okay, and being around Bill Miller a few days a week, I was taught how to use carpenter tools. I didn't know anything about carpenter work, but I knew how to use a handsaw and a square and a level, and I learned to use tools quickly rather than just here's a level and this is how you use it. I learned to whenever you're using a tool and you're making a big salary, like $3.85 an hour was a high wage. I think at Safeway I made $2.50, and that was pretty good. But as a carpenter, as a journeyman's carpenter, I had more damn money than I needed. But I went to the racetrack a few times, so I got rid of all that extra money.
What about college?
College? Well, the thing to do, even if you were a poor student like I was of course to plan on going to, in my case, the University of Oregon. And with the construction job and Safeway, I had enough dollars to find my way to Eugene, so I went to college.
How long after high school?
3 months. The
Oh.
September following.
Okay, so you were just a carpenter during the summer
Right,
before you went from high school to college.
right.
Summer
But
job.
Safeway, every weekend for 20 years.
So you started as a freshman in the University of Oregon in 1950?
Had other people in your family gone to college?
No.
So wasn't that
Albert went for a couple years, but he didn't go to a 4-year college. He did not graduate.
Did it seem like a big deal that you were going because no one did, or was everyone doing it?
Well, see, as being the first one out of this family, they were supportive, but there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm. I mean, I don't.
So they weren't like, "Oh, Donnie, you got into U of O. You're going to be a fancy
or
engineer."
here's $100, Donnie. Have a good time in Eugene. No. In fact, I got on a Greyhound bus my first trip to Eugene. I got off the bus in Eugene, and I didn't know where the college was located. I'd never been to Eugene before. But I walked down Willamette Street, and I found a Safeway store. So, and I had a job lined up, so I went to the Safeway store, and the manager saw me. I introduced myself and had my luggage, and he said, "Put your luggage there and put on an apron." So, so I got behind the check stand, and for the next several years, I had a part-time job in Eugene, working for Safeway.
Where did you live in Eugene?
In a dorm.
Did you have a roommate?
Yeah, I had a couple roommates, and one of them, I knew a friend from Oregon City, a year older, who tried to get me into a fraternity, and I didn't take to that too well. So I was not a frat boy.
Why not?
Well, the freshmen, what do they call them, pledges, I guess. They had to show up at the house on Saturday and do some ugly jobs, and I had to go Safeway. So I was not available to play the game, and so my fraternity experiences were limited.
So how long were you at the University of Oregon?
Was there for 2 years. Yeah. And then I went to Vanport, which is now Portland State. I think I was the last. When I went to Vanport for one term, that was the end of Vanport. They renamed it Portland State College.
Wait, how did you leave the University of Oregon, though?
How did I leave?
Yeah.
Well, like, why did you leave?
Why did you leave?
Well, first of all, I was probably one of the poorest students on campus, but the Safeway jobs kept me there. And finally, I think I'd sort of run out of rope, and I decided to come back to Oregon City, and let's see, that's how I got in. I went to Vanport for a term.
Okay.
Then Lewis and Clark. So I went to Lewis and Clark for a year, and one day at Lewis and Clark, I got a phone call from the president's office. And what the hell did I do? I'd never been in the president's office before, so I found the office, and he introduced. He said, "Well, I'm the president." He says, "I got some news for you." He says, "I got a letter from your draft board, and as president, I can keep you in college, but I look at your transcript, and maybe it's best if I let you go, and I'll see you in 21 months after you get out of the Army." So I got drafted.
So what year was that?
Fall of '53.
Did you protest? Were you like, "No, sir, keep me here"? Or were you like, "It's okay"?
No, I never protested about anything. I'd have been better off maybe if I would have known. No, I didn't. Being a bad student, I didn't have any leverage at all. So I seemed to understand that wasn't. I didn't like it.
But you thought it was fair.
Yeah.
So you were drafted into the Army in '53?
Right.
Where did you go from there? What did the
Fort Ord, which was a training camp at the time, And from Fort Ord, I ended up in Fort Lewis, Washington. And of course, that was neat because I could come home on weekends, play all weekend, and then drive back to Seattle and pick up the military at 8 o'clock Monday morning. The problem was I was a little sleepy because I had been in bed for 2 nights. So we'd have classes at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday. I'd fall asleep. And the captain of the company said, he called me in, he says, well, he says, there's a levy for Germany. And he says, I think I'll put you on that levy so you don't kill yourself driving back and forth to Portland. So that's how I got to Germany.
So what year did you leave for Germany?
The 50. Let's see, 54.
And was the Korean War still happening?
It was officially over. In fact, when I got drafted, now see, I'm a little confused. The cadre, the people that ran us through basic training, they just arrived back from Korea. And that was in 53, fall of 53.
What was your romantic life like at this time? Did you have girlfriends when you were in the army?
Well, I had this one vicious crush on this gal in high school, and she went to Eugene. That's probably why I went to Eugene too. I'm not sure.
It could have influenced it.
Huh?
It could have influenced it.
Probably so. And but
What was her name?
Jacqueline Larius was her maiden name. And I never dated her, but I passed her on the campus a couple times. One time my knees sort of buckled as I walked by her. So
Did she ever know you had a crush on her?
I think so, yeah.
Did you ever ask her out or no?
Well, not at that age, but 30 years later, I took her to dinner a couple times. So.
Okay, but when you went to Germany, did you have a girlfriend or?
Oh, well, yeah.
What were you doing in Germany?
I was what they call a cable clerk. Now that sounds like a pretty bad job, but it was a nice office and desk, and it was better than living in a pup tent out in the middle of France. So, yeah, it was a pretty good job. I had a part-time job as a driver, so I had a chance to drive a couple of generals around Germany.
Where were you stationed?
Heidelberg.
What did the job do as a cable clerk?
I'm sorry.
Like, what were you responsible for as a cable clerk?
Oh, well, in the Army in those days, there was this constant flow of documents, and they were all classified, secret or top secret. And the way these worked is that they had to be delivered to the right person. So you really I was sort of a postman within this one building. That was one of the things. I'd get mail, I'd record it, it was arrived, and I was responsible for taking it to the right office.
So how long were you in Germany for?
Well, I got out of the Army 3 months early. I left, and the argument was I had to take a course at Lewis and Clark that was.
You better look quick, the sun is out. It's just raining.
So I was only there for like
Crazy. I got out of the car.
10 months in Germany.
Man.
So with this argument of getting out early, I got back into college.
So what year did you return to the States?
Let's see, 50, 55.
And what'd you do when you got back?
Went back to Lewis and Clark. Well, first I went to work for one summer.
Kevin, you need to go to work for a
Construction.
florist.
I know they're pretty, right?
Pretty nice.
So okay, so you were studying at Lewis and Clark, and then what happens?
Oh, what year did you get married? The first time.
I got married in 1955.
So that was that same year. What? You gotta have that discussion with your grandmother. How long after coming back from the army did you get married?
I got married in November of 55, right?
What?
I got married in November of 1955.
I have no idea. I wasn't there. I was not around.
Hey, Grandma, we're trying to record some sound, so you can't make any noise.
Don't make any noise.
Can you give us
Or she can be
I'll be
in
as
it.
quiet as I can.
can you give us 15 minutes?
Sure.
Thank you. So what happened? So you how did you meet the girl you married?
Well, I was dating her before I went into the army. So, in fact, I had a 49 Chevrolet convertible, a neat car, and I was living in an apartment a couple blocks from Lewis and Clark, and she was at Marylhurst. So, for 2 or 3 weeks in the fall, I'd leave school, pick her up at Marylhurst, and we'd come to Oregon City. Then I'd dump her back at Marylhurst on Monday morning, and I'd go back to class. So I lived near Lewis and Clark. But that only lasted a short time because I got drafted. So,
What was her name?
Margaret Mary Elizabeth Ann.
Is that really her name?
All young Catholic girls are Margaret Mary Elizabeth Ann. Right,
What did
Daryl?
your parents do?
They owned a motel on 99 in Oak Grove.
How did you meet her?
I met her at Safeway. She would be shopping with her parents, and I was 3 years older, so I think she was a senior in high school. So I went to a couple high school dances, like other guys that were dating the girls that were that age. But that was
Did you write letters while you were in the army?
yeah.
So what year did you get married?
And I left her the car. I left her this 49 Chevrolet convertible, and she wrecked it. So when I got back out of the army, her dad handed me $500 that I was able to get out of the car. I never did see my car again.
So how long were you married before you had your first child?
Well, I got married in November, and Carolyn was born a year and 13 months later. We snuck by the 9-month period.
Wait, she was born 13 months later.
Yeah. December.
Who's after Carolyn?
Julie.
When's Julie born?
January. The year after Carolyn was born.
What year?
50. Same year that I went to grad school in Eugene, which would be 58. I got out of Lewis and Clark in 57, went to grad school in Eugene, and that's when Julie was born.
So you moved to Eugene?
Moved to Eugene.
What did you study in grad school?
Well, physics.
Who's after Julie?
Teresa.
What year is Teresa born?
Teresa was born the year that Margaret was locked up. That would be, let's see, 59.
So when did Margaret start having issues?
She had a few issues a few months after we were married, and I'm not sure what happened prior to that. But things were manageable. Things got out of control after Nancy was born.
Nancy was number 4.
Number 6.
Wait, okay, so
So we
Julie.
jumped ahead.
So, but she's in the hospital after Julie's born? How long was she in the hospital after Julie?
About a week.
In the mental hospital.
Right. Well, they had a special ward for new mothers with mental issues.
What were the mental issues? Did they have a diagnosis?
Well, not really. They use the term schizophrenic, but that's kind of a catch-all. That really doesn't. I hate to use that term because it doesn't mean much. Well, it means something, I guess, to some people, but
Well, to you, what was it? Was it that she was just not living in reality, or?
well, I have so many images, but the ones that stand out are where she would be sitting in a chair, and her body would be sort of frozen, and her hands she would grip the sides of the chair, and no expression in her face. And I have vivid memories of that because I would visit her in the hospital, and that was a sort of a common scene I would see. So she was a pretty sick gal.
So when was the first time she's hospitalized?
Well, let's see. She was hospitalized after Carolyn was born, but only for about a couple, 3 days.
Okay, so it's Carolyn, Julie, Teresa. Who's next?
Susan,
Susan.
Jackie.
And was she in the hospital after each birth? So it was sort of a postpartum thing.
Well, that's when it got, it would sort of reach a peak where she'd have to be hospitalized.
And then afterwards, she'd come back and she was okay, or?
She was okay. Actually, she was her best when the last 3 kids were born. During those pregnancies of the last 3, she was pretty good. But after the 6th baby was born, we moved into a bigger house, and that's when things were unmanageable.
So wait, what child are we on now? I lost track.
He said that during the first 3 pregnancies and stuff, things were.
Yeah, I know, but I don't. The ordering is tough. Can you go through the names of the children in the order in which they were born?
Carolyn,
Yeah.
Julie, Teresa, Susan, Jackie, and Nancy.
And you're in Eugene while all 6 are born?
No, Nancy and Jackie, Susan were born in Seattle. Teresa was born right in the middle of one of her 1-year stays in a mental hospital. And then Julianne, Carolyn, she had short stays in the mental hospital after their births.
But where were they born?
Carolyn was born in Oregon City. Julie was born in Eugene. Teresa in Portland. Susie, Jackie, and Nancy in Seattle.
So what were you doing in Seattle? You
That was
finished grad school, right? And then you.
That was my first stay with Boeing. I went to work for Boeing in January of '60, and the younger three were born in 61, 62, and 63.
Was it a stressful time when you had all those little kids and it was sort of your first official job, right?
I was busy.
And pretty young.
Yeah, I was under 30.
How-
No, I was like 28.
So okay, so all the kids are born, and then how long are you with Margaret before?
Let's see. Margaret was in and out of the hospital several times in '64. Nancy's a baby. And after one of these several day stays at Harborview Hospital in Seattle, I got her out, and she said she wanted to go home. Well, with 6 kids, and I began to realize that my problems were minimal when she was not around. So when she said she wanted to go home, I instantly got her to the airport, and she really never. That was it. She never returned.
Did you and her fight?
No,
Or no, it wasn't like
no,
that.
no.
It was that she had these issues, and she said, and so you started to recognize that when she was in the hospital, it was actually easier.
Easier, right?
So how did you take care of these 6 kids by yourself?
Well, I had babysitters. My friends at Boeing called my house Miller's Home for Unwed Mothers, because unwed mothers were good babysitters. You know, they needed a job, and they couldn't get a job anyplace else, so use them as babysitters. That worked out pretty well.
So what year you put her on the plane back to Oregon?
Well, let's see. It had to be in. Well, let's see. I want to say. Well, it had to be like 64 or 65.
So how old was Carolyn?
Carolyn was like 8.
So then, what do you do until you get to Houston?
Well, I had babysitters, and worked at Boeing, and was, doing everything that a Boeing engineer had to do. Traveled a little bit, but I had to always have, someone there, so that was kind of tough to find somebody that we could spend the night with them. So
Did Reva come up?
Reva came up. Reva was there when I was in California. That would be after I left Eugene in '57, fall of '57. I was in California for 2 years, 58, 59. And Reva came down to help me with the kids. Only 3 of them.
Wait, why were you in California?
Well, I worked for North American Aviation.
So you were in California before you came to Seattle?
Seattle, right.
Wait, before you went to Eugene or after Eugene?
After Eugene.
So you went to Eugene and then
To California.
to Seattle.
Right.
So where's your first job? Is it in
First job was in California.
at North American, and then you went to Boeing.
Right. In those days, the young aerospace engineers were, there was a lot of movement between jobs. Everything, things were, you know, if you had a pulse, you could get a job.
So, did you stay at Boeing until you moved to Houston?
Stayed at Boeing till I went to Houston.
And what year did you go to Houston?
Went to Houston in, I want to say 66. Does that make sense?
We heard 68 last night, but it could have been
What did you
66.
hear?
Last night you and Grandma said it was 68.
68. Well, I was
That's
there.
when I get married, though.
Yeah, so I was there a year before that. It could have been 67.
All right. So that takes us through when you got married, or that takes us to Houston, right?
Right.
Maybe we should have a break now, and then we can deal after Houston.